welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones. Today, we're tackling inflation and the economic impact on our state. Inflation is up about 7%, and it's the worst we've seen in nearly 40 years. It's impacting everything from gas and food to clothes and entertainment. Standing by, the founder of Enduring Investments, Michael Ashton. He's considered a pioneer in the U.S. inflation derivatives market. In addition to being a Jersey guy, he's also known as the inflation guy. Michael is also the author of What's Wrong with Money, the Biggest Bubble of All. First, distinguished research professor and director of Rutgers Economic Advisory Service, Dr. Michael Lahr. He holds a PhD in regional science from the University of Pennsylvania. At the Edward J. Blaustein School, Dr. Lahr teaches a course on global analytics and courses for PhD students. Since 1995, Dr. Lahr has supervised research on a broad array of public policy issues in the field of housing, economic development, program evaluations, and fiscal and economic impact analysis. All right, well, Dr. Lahr, thank you so much for joining us. And we're hearing a lot about inflation and that it's hitting us hard, it's hitting us fast. But when you actually look to define what is inflation, what is the biggest driver of inflation that we're seeing today, can you simply define it?
Well, it's first of all, it's something that is measured by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And they go over time and measure a bundle of goods. And they have actually some of them laid out separately, especially for certain metropolitan areas. And so they look at those bundle of goods, and then aggregate them based on the average shares that households buy of those particular goods. So this is the consumer price index that's being used, and there's also producer price indices. So there's a lot of different ways to measure inflation. And moreover, they even take out certain things that spike a lot. And those are particularly housing and energy. They sometimes take out of those things. And those are some of the things that are affecting us now the most. So they can take that out and they put it in. So there's two different measures. The CPIU taking out energy because it fluctuates so much, like I said, and the housing prices do sometimes too.
Okay, well, driving into work, you can see price of gas is going up. So can you give us a little insight into how the current state of inflation and how it's affecting our state in New Jersey?
Yeah, so one of the things, and there are two things that people always seem to know the prices: milk and gasoline. And so those are the good things and the bad things. The thing is, gasoline fluctuates so much all the time that even when inflation isn't high, sometimes it goes up and people complain. And of course, if you're buying 10 gallons worth of gas and it goes up 10 cents, that's only $1 a tank. And depending upon what you do, in the big scheme of things, sometimes 10 cents a gallon isn't much. Of course, if you're a trucker or an airplane company that does flights, it can be quite a bit, because for them, it's almost all the costs. On the other hand, for the average household, it's about 5% of all costs is home fuel and auto fuel. So it's something, while we should be concerned about, it probably is not the prime concern we should have. There are other things. And on the other hand, it does pervade the whole economy. That is, everything uses energy, about 5%. So if we all use energy, it does eventually come through in inflation, even if they take it out of the index, because it goes into the price of things like the food you get delivered to your house, as well as your own gas that you use.
Yeah, like a domino effect, really, a domino effect. Yeah, so New Jersey, we pay the highest taxes, some of the highest taxes and the highest housing prices in the country. So how is inflation impacting on real estate and also some of the lower income renters that we see in New Jersey communities?
Well, first of all, only about 5% of people move every year. So it's really not so, while we see the prices rising, it's only for 5% of people every time they buy, and the rents aren't going up quite as fast. Leaving that aside, the really big thing has been the used car market. And the used car market, I thought, say about 4 months ago, would probably ease up because the chip problem, which is what's causing it, the new cars with chips and the silicon chips they use, that would be the main issue. And I thought, well, that would be something that was, as I said, a supply issue, not a real big one. Well, it turns out it's a supply chain issue just because we don't have production. It's not a matter of Chinese production not getting here. there's just not enough production in the world. And so while new car prices went up 25%, something like that, used car prices went up 37%. And so that really hits the lower income market a little bit more severely. If your car dies, you need something. And that's one of the things that come up. Not to mention, there's some parts of that people are complaining that are part of not really part of the new car price, but get put in there too, which is the financing of them. Many car companies are now forcing you to finance through their company, whether you can pay cash upfront or not. They're trying to get you to do that so they can get their 2,000 or 3,000 off the top.
Really? What? So companies can do that if you say, "Hey, I'm here. I've got cash," and especially younger people. Sometimes they might have been saving for a car, and they're like, "You know what? I've got this much cash. I'm ready to pay." And you're saying that car companies can, at this point,
Well,
to help themselves?
they'll do that, or they'll charge you some other finance fee. That's the point. Is that it's one of those odd things that you can do. Like I bought a new car this past summer, and they gave me 0% inflation, but then they charged me some amount for that. Extended my thing for a little bit longer. On the other hand, it's still only 3% finance. So if you can pay cash, why not?
Right.
Whether they can or not, they're doing it.
Right.
And if you don't want their car, you can go somewhere else.
So it seems that wherever you go, everything seems to be more expensive.
Well, generally speaking, that's not true for everything, but yeah, clothing, for example, is not that much more expensive than it was before.
Yeah.
Certain things that are not so much. It's really, energy goods and car prices. Those are the main two things. Some of the other things are rising, like food going out. Part of that's because of the shortage of workers, the restaurant workers, and same thing with healthcare. There's having issues there with healthcare workers retiring early. People like my age or so are saying, well, what's the point? And dodging the work market. So that's one of the other issues. And so there's a shortage, but it's really only a shortage in things like food industry and some rare real retail industries.
Yeah. Does inflation, is it hurting one population more than another?
Always hurts the lower income groups. I mean, like I said, somebody can, richer people can afford luxury cars. They can afford a couple thousand extra. A couple thousands, an average household is, 4 or 5% of your income. And
Well, I guess what I guess I meant more is it hurts the small business owner as much as it's hurting the
oh, for sure,
young consumer out there.
Anybody who's already tight, things are already tight. It's not helping you.
Right. Right.
It's really only hurting at the gas pump for the main part, and also at, like I said, cars. And you mentioned housing. Well, if you're staying in place, generally speaking, people aren't raising rents. Your mortgage won't change. If anything, people are had been refinancing downward. So that's one of the good things that's been happening, is that we have low interest rates. On the other hand, housing markets, like you indicated, housing prices in New Jersey went up as much as 25% in some areas, like Salem County, which is in the south, while Bergen maybe was more like 10-15%. And so we see prices rising. On the other hand, these are for ready to walk in homes for people who had been renting earlier, and generally speaking, and they took the prime market. On the other hand, it's not many people are moving because of the pandemic, and so there are not many new existing homes that are becoming available because there's not that much in the way of listings going on, and that's shrinking as well.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about microeconomics, the decisions of our government, both federal and local, federal, state, local. How do those decisions, how are they contributing to inflation? You see the big headlines happening, and how do you make sense of it, and what truly is contributing to inflation?
The biggest one, and unfortunately, there's really not a whole lot that our government can do, because both the things, the energy prices and the auto thing, are worldwide. So we're not the only country suffering from that. We happen to be the biggest consuming country, so that may be part of the issue. But some of the other things are that we only import, for example, 4 to 8% of our oil is Russian, and so if we put sanctions on, that part maybe won't hurt us so much. But on the other hand, Europe has 40%. So we start taking all this Russian oil off the market. Well, all other oils from all other countries are going to go up because there's a shortage. In other words, the highest bidder gets the fuel, and so we do import a lot. If we use our own national reserves for oil, that's okay, but that's only going to last 3 to 6 months. So if this Ukraine-Russian war goes on for a long time, and we put on the sanctions, or Europe does, which they've already done, prices are gonna go up, and maybe as much as another 50%. So hold on to your seat.
Well, that is significant. 50%. Wow.
That's what they're saying.
Right. What kind of timeline?
Well, probably that would take a year. We probably would start seeing the prices go up pretty soon. Slowly, and then the point is, say 6 to 8 months from now is when that 50% would go. If the sanctions continue, if the war goes on.
What can businesses, what can people do? A lot of this is out of our hands. Do you have advice for what people can do when you're watching this and you're thinking, oh gosh, how do I prepare myself there? How do you prepare? I mean,
don't go out to California for vacation. Go to the Jersey Shore. Visit the Highlands. Whatever, something close by. Enjoy things close by. It's the best thing that people have done that in the past when there's vacation time. Otherwise, the daily commute's going to rise, and so you're going to have to sacrifice somewhere else. Hopefully, we will. Inflation is good to the point as long as your income keeps pace, but if you don't get those raises, it's going to be tough. And if just getting the raises will induce more inflation, because whatever it is your company's producing will then go up in price, and that's going to cause inflation for everybody else. So, the government would just have to hope that other companies don't do that. But on the other hand, if they don't do that, you might get poached by another organization to work for them, because everybody wants people experienced who've made it through the pandemic. This is one of the things that's been happening more and more this past year, that companies have been poaching one of those people, because the people who continue to work for the pandemic are the prized peaches,
Well, very complicated and so much to take into consideration. But thank you so much for taking the time to break this down for us, and we appreciate your time today.
Okay, thanks.
We're continuing our conversation on inflation, and we're going to bring in the author and founder of Enduring Investments, Michael Ashton. Michael, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, first, let's talk about, why are you the inflation guy?
Well, they say that to be an expert in something, you have to have 10,000 hours of background and work in it. And there just aren't a whole lot of people who've wanted to spend 10,000 hours focusing on inflation. And I'm probably over 20 or 30,000 at this point. So I'm the inflation guy because I've been doing it for much longer than we cared about inflation.
Well, and it's hard to, you would think it would be easy to define, but sometimes it's very hard for people to define, and even for other people, for the consumers to understand inflation. Well, it means everything's expensive. Can you give us a simple explanation of inflation, what it means?
Yeah, well, it means something different for an economist who's trying to measure it than it does for somebody who's out and spending money, right? So we can come up with very technical terms about how we measure particular subcomponents of inflation, how you measure rents, how you measure, and that's the Bureau of Labor Statistics definition of CPI. But most people have a very visceral sense of what's happening to inflation. They couldn't tell you that, the price for stoned wheat flour was up a certain percentage over the last 12 months, but they can tell you that it costs more to go out to a restaurant. They can tell you it costs more to buy gasoline. And so inflation is when your dollar doesn't go as far. You put $100 in your wallet and you find out that you run out in 3 days, and used to take you 4 days. That's how most people experience inflation, and that's probably, I think, the best definition of it is it just your money just doesn't go as far as it did.
Yeah, and you mentioned CPI, that's the Consumer Price Index. So what is your take? What's the driving force behind inflation? Because we're looking at the headlines, we're looking at the pandemic, we're looking at Russia, we're looking at the supply chain. So what's the driving force behind what we are seeing right now?
Yeah, it's we started out coming out of the pandemic, and everybody started pointing to supply chain problems and shortage of computer chips in new cars and things like that. And all those things are symptoms. The cause is actually very, very simple, right? If you spend a lot of money and as a federal government, and you spend that money by printing it from the Federal Reserve, then you get inflation. And it's a very simple prescription, and it works really well. And all these other things are price changes that are caused by too much money chasing too few goods and services.
And I personally have a hard time understanding, why does the government printing more money? We need more money. How in the world does printing more money make things? I mean, I do understand it, but can you kind of walk us through that? Take us back to economics 101 here.
Sure. Well, actually, I think it's easier to take you into an orchard. I think going back to the way I was describing it as, your dollar doesn't go as far. Think about you go into an orchard that grows apples, and one year there's 10,000 apples. The next year there's 100,000 apples. What happens to the price of an apple for that orchard? How do they have to get rid of those apples? And they'll end up marking the price down. Those apples will be less valuable compared to the pears that are being grown in the next orchard over, that the same amount of pears this year. Okay, so those apples are more plentiful, and so they're less valuable. Well, if money grew on trees, and over the last year or two, it kind of has, as the Federal Reserve has just printed lots more, we had a bumper crop of money, and that makes the value of money go down. And so that's really what it comes down to. If you have lots more of something, it tends to be worth less. Diamonds are more valuable than water. This is the diamond water paradox of Adam Smith. Diamonds are more valuable than water, not because they're more useful. We need water more than we need diamonds. They're more valuable because they're more scarce. Make something less scarce and it gets less valuable.
Okay. Thank you for that analogy. That's what I've been looking for, is to make it simple so that people, okay, now we get it. All right, so going back to the pandemic's role in inflation, what is the role of the pandemic and that it played in the inflation that we're seeing? Or is that really the driving force?
Well, the pandemic served as cover for all kinds of programs and all kinds of activities that would have been hard to pull off otherwise. And, we had trillions in federal spending, and which would have been really hard to do if we weren't focused on trying to keep the economy going, even though everybody was shut down. And it would have been really, really hard for the Federal Reserve to buy trillions of dollars worth of bonds and just flush money into the system if we didn't have a crisis. And so the fundamental cause is still, spastic federal spending financed by a profligate monetary policy. But the cover for those things was the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot that the average person can do. I mean, we can't really control things. But when it comes to our own pocketbook, and we're seeing that things are more and more expensive, driving into work, gas is probably going to be more by the time I drive home. If I decide to go get a Happy Meal, it's going to be way more. So what can people do? Because we don't know what the future holds. We don't know how much more things are going to start costing. So what can people do? Especially here in New Jersey, it's gas is skyrocketing just in a couple of days.
Right. Well, so you have, as a person who runs a budget, you've got inflows and you got outflows, and that's what it boils down to, right? So on the outflow side, you can control what you spend on, and save money here and spend it there. That's not a great solution, because everything is going up in price. And if you have the same amount of money, you sort of have to choose maybe fewer durable goods so that you can eat out more, whatever. The real solution is on the income side, and individuals have to go out and push their employers to pay them more. And that's, unfortunately, that causes a wage price spiral, and economists get very upset about that. But as an individual, that's what you have to do. You have to increase the income side, because your outflow side isn't going to, unless you want to change your outflow side a whole lot. You can invest differently, but there aren't a whole lot of inflation protected investments that the average person can kind of go access. If you're a hedge fund, fine. If you're a pension fund, fine. But you and I, there just aren't a whole lot of products out there, although this is something we're trying to change, but there aren't a whole lot of products out there for the average person to protect their nest eggs.
Right. I mean, that is a big frustration, because there is, no matter what you do, no matter what you cut, there's only so much you can save, and you can't always get more money unless you take on a different job, and then that has a domino effect if you have to pay for childcare and such. So, are there certain decisions right now, if people are looking and they're saying, all right, but we need to really hunker down, we need to really take a look at what we can and can't do. I'm not going to be able to change what my employer may pay me. Are there certain decisions that people should be making or thinking about, or even things you should be pulling back on right now?
I think that's an individual decision. Inflation is a tax, and that's, just like taxes. If all of a sudden they jack your taxes up from 30% to 40%, what can you do about it? Well, other than work to change the policies. And in this case, this is maybe triggered by the pandemic, but it's caused by policies. There's not a ton you can do other than, if your taxes go up 10%, they're taking 10% more of your money. What's your answer to that? And it's the same answer with inflation. You've got 10% less money, so you're going to spend it on different things. And I think what it tends to mean is that, I hate to say hoard, but you tend to buy a little bit more of things that you think are going to be going up in price, right? So, right now we're seeing wheat prices go through the roof because of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. And so, I'm going to buy more bread this week and get a big sack of flour. I mean, it sounds crazy, but that's kind of the decisions that you have to sort of make. But at the end of the day, those dollars in your pocket are simply going to buy less next week than they buy today. Yeah. And there's just moving around the deck chairs in the Titanic is what the average person can do, unless you can change the amount coming in.
The governor recently gave his budget address, and he said the state's flush with money apparently, and many homeowners are going to get up $700 refund. So what's happening at the state level, or what do you think could be happening? Because it's great to get a $700 refund, but a lot of people are saying, what? Why can we lower taxes now? Can you have that conversation? Do you think those conversations will happen at the state level? Because once the governor lays out his plan, it's up to the legislature to hash out all those details.
Yeah, we have a lot of volatility in our lives all of a sudden, and in financial terms. So we had volatility in sort of the mode of life terms for a while. But now we have volatility in financial terms. And so, you've got changes in your incomes and your changes in your costs and changes in policy, changes in taxes. So if you do go get that raise, then the government collects more taxes as a result. Real estate prices are going up because of inflation. So the government collects more taxes because of through real estate taxes. So, I think that the answer is the same now, again, as it would be if all of a sudden income taxes went up. You want to go to the state government and say, okay, how much of this can I get back? I sent it all to you. Now I want some of it back. And that's a conversation that we have in all kinds of other contexts, and it tends to not be terribly successful as we seem to get, more and more of it goes to the government every year.
Well, one final question. What comes up must come back down. So where do you see us in that journey? Where are we on that mountain climbing upwards to inflation? How bad is it going to get before it gets better?
So that's a great question. So, and there's two answers. The rate of change of inflation. Okay, so right now it's around 7%, and it's going to go a little bit higher in the next couple of months over the on a trailing 12 months basis. It'll go probably up to around 8 or a little bit above, and then the year-on-year number is going to gradually decline. It's not going to decline as far as people would like it to. It's probably going to decline to 4 or 5%, which is a lot higher than we used to have. And so that's one answer, is that we're probably close to the worst year-on-year change. But you have to be careful not to conflate a peak in the rate of change with a peak in prices. Prices aren't going to come back down. They're just going to go up more slowly than they have been going up. So those dollars that have lost value in your pocket are not going to get that value back. You're not going to suddenly be able to afford things you could afford last year, but you can't afford now. Those prices have gone up, and they're not about to just roll over and go back lower, other than, of course, gasoline prices will probably eventually go back down. Those things that do oscillate a lot, like, again, corn and wheat prices, coffee prices, those things will probably eventually go back down. But the things that you buy every day, the goods and services that have gone up in price, the used car prices, new car prices, washing machines, those things aren't going to go back down in price. They're just going to stop going up as fast.
Well, we thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I think I need to cut it out so I can go ask my boss for a raise. Just kidding. But thank you so much, Michael. We appreciate the time.
I'm happy to help.
And that'll do it for today on New Jersey Politics. I am Laura Jones, and we look forward to seeing you back here next time.